In this video, I wanted to do an introduction to APIs, kind of cover over what an API is, why we would use it, and then give some examples of how we can start using that. I'm going to go pretty briefly through this, just kind of cover the highlights, as well as show several different ways that we can use APIs in order to make our lives easier. So first off, the question is, well, what is an API? And according to Wikipedia, an API, or Application Programming Interface, is a connection between computers and computer programs. Basically, it's a way to be able to communicate and to share data from one system to another. Probably the most common examples you might see of this is when you have, say, a lightweight computer, or you have information that you want to access from a remote machine. For instance, maybe I want to see what the weather is in my current area. Now, my current computer doesn't track what the current weather is, so therefore I have to go out to somebody else's webpage or somebody else's resources to find that information. I can use an API to find out what the weather is in my current location from my computer. Similarly, if I wanted to find out what the current stock prices are, I don't have all the stock information on my computer, so therefore I call out to an API and I say, show me the current price for X stock. Or sending email, or playing video games, or pretty much anything on your computer today, most things on your computer today, can be performed remotely via an API. So let's look at a couple of examples of APIs, or more specifically, one example. For this, I'm going to go to a website called placekitten.com. Now, placekitten.com is a sample API. And the whole idea here is that if you are creating a web page or doing some visual documentation or something, and you need a picture, well, you can come here and you can get a picture that's exactly the right size of what you need. That's just a placeholder. The idea then is that you take these pretty cat pictures and you replace them at a later date with the actual pictures you're going to put in there. However, we can see that there is some information down here that talks about how to actually access these in order to get the exact width and height that we're looking for. Let's go ahead and try this link right here. And I'll see up here in the address bar, I have placekitten.com/200/300. Now, this actually has to do with the size of the image I'm looking at. 200 pixels wide versus 300 pixels tall. And we can kind of see, yeah, it's not quite as wide here as it is tall. Well, because this is a sample API, what I can do is I can start changing these numbers here to get different results. For instance, if I change this 300 to a 6, the picture should be just the same width, but it should be double the height. So I hit enter and I get just that. Same thing with the width. I'll change from 200 to let's say 350. Not 3,500, 350. And I see now I get a wider picture that was the same height. So this is an example of an API, and I can utilize I can change the values up here in the address of the API in order to change the results. And that's one of the ways that APIs work, is by changing the address that is accessing in order to send a request to the information, or to the API to get different information back. These might be considered parameters or options of the API. Now, there are a lot of different ways that we can access this API. Let me actually copy this. And I'm going to go into a terminal window here. Let's make this a little bigger. One of the common ways in order to access an API is from a command line using a command line tool called curl, or curl. If you just run curl -- help, it will give you lots and lots of information. And you can see there's tons of options here. some of these options you actually need for more advanced APIs. However, for this one, we're going to use mostly just the curl. Oops. So curl and the address that I just copied off the web page. What CURL does is it goes out to the web page the same way that the web browser does and then returns the results. Now, this is going to actually give me an error specifically because it's returning a picture as opposed to text data like most APIs would. So in this case, I have to actually do something a little bit different, and I have to add a -- output and give it a file name. So let's go ahead and call this -- output. And I want to save this to a file. I'll call it, I don't know, cat.jpg. And it downloaded the file. If I come into my file browser here, I'll see right there I have my cat.jpg, which is exactly 350 by 600 pixels. Well, maybe I don't like that one. Maybe let's try a different one. Let's try 550 by 600 pixels, and I'll overwrite the cat.jpg that's there. Go back to my file browser, and I can see now I have a different picture. So that's just one example of how to use an API. Now, if this was a text-based result as opposed to a picture, I would definitely have seen the results through my terminal window as opposed to as a picture here. All right, so that is just one way in order to access the API. Another very common way is to utilize a program called Postman. I'll let this warm up here for a second. Postman is, well, it's just exactly what we're doing here. It is an API testing tool. There's probably a whole lot more capabilities there than what I currently use it for, but with Postman, we can go ahead and we can request an API and we can provide various information for it, such as authentication credentials and specifying what kind of options we want from the API. But in this case, since we're using a very, very simple setup, I can just go ahead and say new. So I'll click the plus button here. And here in the request URL, I'm going to go ahead and paste in the address and send. And there we can see, yep, there's our nice little kitty down at the bottom. Now this is an extremely simple configuration here, but we can see, yeah, let's change our picture sizes, and then we can see how they change down below. As you get more and more into APIs, this tool starts to become much more enticing and much more interesting. For instance, we can type in various query parameters. We can add in some authentication types in here, such as API keys, tokens, digest authentication, OAuth, and even NTLM. We can include headers such as what type of data we will accept. For instance, we could say accept, and then application JSON would be a very common item that you would specify in the headers to have the API return the data properly. We can include some body or some post data that we're sending to the environment, as well as putting some scripts, tests, and various settings into the environment, and then even change our command type. Now, I'm going to actually undo all of that. There we go. Confirm this still works. Yes, okay. The other great thing about Postman is it helps us work with scripting languages. Now, I said that this was a great example of how to get started with an API. It also helps me take the next step to automating that API. If I click up here on these little brackets with the slash in the middle, when I hover over it, it says code. And I can see here, oh, it actually gives me some examples. For instance, there's my CURL example. They added in a few more options that I didn't necessarily add in. They added in a location, a request, specifying the get method. Let's actually zoom in a little bit closer so we can see that. There we go. So there's our CURL example. If we wanted other types, for instance, C#, we can see an example of using C# there. Dart, an HTTP request, Java, JavaScript, and so on. And what I'm looking for here specifically is going to be Python using the requests library. And we can see right there is an example Python command that will give us our code here. Or I'm sorry, Python code that will give us the code that is necessary to run this as a Python script. As an example, I'm going to go ahead and fire up Visual Studio Code, and let's create a new file, and I'll call this placekitten1.py. And I'll paste in the code. Now this is going to give me text. So it's not actually going to save the image. So it's going to look a little weird when I run it. However, we can see, yeah, we've defined the URL here. If I want to change the image size, well, I can kind of come in here and I can just change those attributes right there. Using Python, I can also programmatically craft this URL and specify an X and a Y value at that time. I can see there's no payload or headers in this example. Those come in, like I was saying previously, at a later date. We then do a requests.request, specifying get, the URL, and then the headers and the data, and then print out the response to the screen. If I run this, it will print out down here at the bottom a whole bunch of garbage because it's actually a picture as opposed to a text image. So there you have it. There's an introduction to APIs. There is a whole lot more that we'll be getting into shortly in following videos, but this is at least introducing you to the idea of APIs as well as the tools you might use to access them.